What if the most important part of a go-fast boat isn't the engine at all? Ask anyone at a poker run what they're running and you'll hear horsepower, never gear cases. And the surprising part? Mercury didn't invent the best one. A rival shop did, and then beat Mercury with it on the racecourse, twice. But that isn't the twist. The twist is that the losing side eventually bought the entire company to get its hands on one gear case. So let's go back to the drives everybody was breaking before that gear case existed. Long before anybody argued about surface drives at a boat ramp, Cruiser had already conquered the planet. Mercury rolled out the sterndrive at the Chicago Boat Show in the early 60s, and the thing went on to take better than 80% of the world market. Mercury followed it with the Speedmaster line of high-performance drives, and for a good while, that was the ceiling. Then offshore racing got serious. Through the 70s, men like Bob Magoon, Carlo Bonomi, and Sandy Satullo were winning all over the world in cigarettes, Bertrams, and Cougars fitted with big block racing engines out of Kiekhaefer Aeromarine. Winning speeds hovered around 80 miles an hour, which sounds tame until you remember they were doing it in ocean seas big enough to launch a 36-footer clean into the air. Carl Kiekhaefer, the founder himself, called those launches Kitty Hawk flights, and the drives could not take it. Speedmaster 3s broke over and over. Kiekhaefer Aeromarine couldn't buy complete drives from Mercury, so it bought loose components and assembled its own. When Mercury cut off the propeller supply too, the company began making its own, and it was being asked to do work nobody had drawn it for. The answer didn't come from Wisconsin's biggest engine company at all. It came from a customer who'd had enough. His name was Hugo Sager, a Swiss businessman and offshore racer who had grown tired of watching his own drives grenade themselves. Roughly 40 years ago, he approached Kiekhaefer Aeromarine with a proposal: design me a racing drive. He'd pay as the work progressed, and he'd become the European distributor. Deal struck. The engineers started where any sane company starts, with tooling they already owned. That meant the K600, a sterndrive Kiekhaefer had put out about a dozen years earlier. But those 12 years had taught them something that changed everything. A propeller, it turned out, is happier sitting higher and farther back than convention had allowed. Reusing the K600 meant beginning the race with a handicap, so they set it aside and drew a new drive from nothing. Larry Lose and Tom Thiessen did the drawing, and by Fred Kiekhaefer's own account, nobody involved got much sleep. Then came the part that should have killed the whole project. Seeger backed out. The money that was supposed to fund the work evaporated, and Kiekhaefer Aeromarine, a small operation that had spent years machining parts for Mercury, Volvo Penta, and even Johnson and Evinrude to keep the lights on, decided to finish the drive anyway on its own dime. Racers George Linder and Mark Levine fed the team real-world feedback while the design firmed up. Nearly 40 years ago, during the week of the Miami International Boat Show, the finished drive was shown to the public in the loosest possible sense of that word. No booth, no banner. A hotel suite near the show, by appointment only, door closed. Sterndrives by Kiekhaefer. One of the first customers through that door was Tom Gentry, already a world offshore champion and not a man who bought hardware on a hunch. For the Key West Worlds, Gentry leased his Scarab raceboat to Wellcraft, and the fellow who ended up behind the wheel was Don Johnson. Yes, that Don Johnson of Miami Vice, an arrangement most of America filed under publicity stunt. By that November, Johnson, Bill Sirois, and Gus Anastasi were Superboat World Cup champions in the Gentry Turbo Eagle. The following season, at the Atlantic City Worlds, Bob Kaiser's boat systems ran experimental twin-turbo power and soaked up all the attention, while Peter Markey's Little Caesars Pizza Apache outlasted the field and took the title. Both of those championship boats had the same hardware hanging off the transom, a drive built by an outfit Mercury had refused to sell parts to. 2 world titles in 2 seasons put this drive onto a roll call of transoms that keeps growing. Start with the early days when the drive was sold on its own and teams mated it to whatever engine they already owned. Kiekhaefer Aeromarine had spent years building its own big block racing engines, and rival teams brought their own combinations, so the number 6 spent its youth behind a zoo of power plants rather than one house motor. Once Mercury owned it, the pairings tightened up. The 525SC arrived as the first mass-produced supercharged marine engine to carry a warranty, and within a couple of years, the catalogue added supercharged units at 600 and 750 horsepower. Smaller engines made do with Bravo drives. The 6 took the top of that ladder, where a Bravo would have surrendered. Then came the fuel-injected, supercharged SCI generation, and the drive kept pace by evolving rather than being swapped out. Today, its descendants carry the supercharged SCI models and the quad-cam turbo engines right up to the 1550. The boats followed the same curve. Early on, they were pure race boats, Scarabs and Apaches running offshore circuits in front of crowds. Then, the hardware filtered down into poker running, cigarettes, outer limits, and MT, is owned by folks whose day jobs had nothing whatsoever to do with racing. That's the pattern worth noticing. A drive commissioned by one Swiss racer for one narrow purpose became standard fitment for an entire slice of American boating, and it managed that without ever being cheap or easy to live with. None of it works without one strange idea about propellers that most boaters have heard of but few understand. Picture the drive on a normal family runabout. The gear case hangs well below the hull. The whole torpedo is underwater, the skeg is underwater, and the propeller turns in solid water with every blade loaded through every degree of rotation. That's fine at 40 miles an hour. Above 80, all that submerged aluminum becomes an anchor because drag climbs with the square of your speed. Double the speed and you roughly quadruple the penalty. A surface-piercing setup attacks the problem by getting the hardware out of the water. The engine sits higher, the drive is trimmed up, and the boat runs with the propeller about half exposed, the shaft line skimming along the surface. Only the blades sweeping downward through the water are doing anything. The blades on the upstroke are in open air, doing nothing, costing nothing. Two good things happen. The wetted surface of the gear case collapses to a fraction of what it was, so the drag penalty falls off a cliff. And because only half the propeller disc is loaded at any moment, you can swing more diameter and more pitch than a submerged setup would tolerate without stalling. The propellers change shape to suit. Surface props use cleaver blades, blunt on the trailing edge and sharp on the leading edge, built to slice into the water and exit clean instead of dragging a curtain of air down with them. Water pickups move low on the gear case because the usual inlets spend half their life in fresh air. There's a vocabulary trap here worth clearing up while we're at it. What a surface propeller does is ventilate, pulling air down from the atmosphere on purpose. Cavitation is a different animal entirely. Water flashing to vapor under low pressure and then imploding hard enough to chew metal off a blade. Ventilation is the design intent. Cavitation is damage. Plenty of folks at the ramp use those words interchangeably, and the difference is worth about $1,000 a blade. Mercury aims its surface-piercing gear cases at boats capable of better than 85 miles an hour, and that number matters enormously. Under it, you have half a propeller and a bad attitude. Over it, you have the fastest thing on the bay. Slim gear cases sound wonderful until you try pushing 1,000 horsepower through one without turning the gears into shrapnel. That's the wall every drive engineer runs into. Inside a conventional lower unit, one vertical drive shaft comes down from the engine, ends in a pinion gear, and that single pinion meshes with the gear on the propeller shaft. Every pound-foot the motor makes crosses one set of teeth. Want to handle more torque? Make the teeth bigger. Bigger teeth need bigger gears. Bigger gears need a fatter housing. And a fatter housing means more drag, which undoes the whole reason you built a surface drive to begin with. It's a circle you can't square by adding beef. The 6 broke that circle by splitting the load instead. Rather than one vertical shaft, it uses 2 side by side, each ending in its own pinion, both feeding the lower gear. 2 contact patches instead of 1, roughly double the gear engagement and about half the torque down each path. The teeth stay modest, the housing stays thin. Mercury describes it today as a twin-pinion gearshaft design, and the company traces the trick back to lower units. Its outboard racing department was building in the 50s. Read that again, because it's the detail nobody mentions. The clever bit inside the most fearsome sterndrive on Earth came out of outboard racing. That wasn't the only reason it survived contact with the ocean. The lower gears are forged rather than cast, which matters a great steel when load arrives in spikes rather than in a steady stream. And the silhouette was drawn long and narrow instead of round and stubby, because a shape that leaves the water cleanly at 100 miles an hour is a fundamentally different shape than one optimized to shove a pontoon around. Bolt all of that together and you land on the strange truth at the heart of this story. The number 6 isn't powerful because it's huge. It's powerful because the load got divided, and dividing the load let the thing stay small enough to fly. Mercury lost 2 world championships to this design before landing on a cheaper solution than engineering, buying the company outright. The deal closed about 35 years ago. Brunswick Corporation, Mercury's parent, acquired Kiekhaefer Aeromarine outright and began folding its operations into Mercury Performance Products. The drive came along, and so did the rest of the catalog. Zero effort controls, K-plane trim tabs, propellers. Fred Kiekhaefer was named president of the combined organization. Sit with the family arithmetic for a second, because it's remarkable. Carl Kiekhaefer built the company that became Mercury Marine, resigned from it, and set up an independent shop that ended up beating Mercury on the race course with a drive Mercury would never have sanctioned. Then his son sold that drive back to Brunswick and walked in the front door as president of the racing division. Whatever you want to call that, it isn't a normal corporate acquisition. The Kiekhaefer drive was rebadged as the Mercruiser No. 6. Over the following years, it collected more aliases than a conman. No. 6, Speedmaster 6, SSM6, the dry-sump 6, and eventually M6. Here's the part most people miss. Mercury carried on selling the drive to customers running somebody else's engines, which had been Kiekhaefer Aeromarine's practice from the start. A racer could order the No. 6 as a standalone unit and mate it to a motor built anywhere, and plenty of them did precisely that. Mercury owned the crown jewel and never locked the door on it. High-performance operations were consolidated into an expanded Plant 36, which happened to be the former Kiekhaefer Aeromarine building perched on the ledge overlooking Lake Winnebago. Not long after, the department dropped the high-performance name altogether and became Mercury Racing, which is the badge riding on the drive to this day. The drive that won those titles had one weakness left, and the fix arrived from a racer's garage, not Wisconsin. Gear cases traditionally run wet. The lower unit is filled with oil, and the gears churn through it like a paddle wheel. At cruising RPM, that's harmless. At 6,000 RPM behind a supercharged big block, that churn turns into measurable horsepower lost to stirring lubricant. Plus heat nobody ordered. The answer was dry-sump lubrication, which stores oil elsewhere and sprays it where it's needed instead of drowning everything in it. By most accounts inside the racing community, racers got there ahead of the factory. Toward the back half of the 90s, converted 6s with dry sump modifications were winning world championships on catamarans. Mercury productionized the concept, and the dry sump 6 became the default. Later came the swept-back skeg, another shape borrowed from whatever was working at speed. There was a detour worth mentioning. About 20 years back, Mercury launched the NXT drive alongside the 700 SCI and 662 SCI engines. Reviews were mixed, largely thanks to a fat gear case and a water pickup mounted on the back of the torpedo. The NXT was discontinued roughly a decade ago, but its compact transmission was too good to bin, so Mercury married that transmission to the 6 and called the package the NXT6. Riding an M-series transom assembly with a composite cowling, stronger steering cylinders, and longer pin bearings. Owning one of these has never been for the faint of wallet, and the reasons run well beyond the sticker price. Let's talk money and misery, because a fair look at any piece of hardware includes what it takes out of you. A new M6 drive on its own, with no engine attached, lists north of $30,000 at dealers. That's the drive. Rebuilds are a way of life rather than an emergency. Teams running 1,500 horsepower catamarans have gone through a refresh every couple of races, and specialist shops built entire businesses around nothing but 6 drives and their descendants. Setup is the other tax. Drive height, propeller choice, and trim all interact and get any one of the 3 wrong, and the boat either blows out and over-revs or refuses to climb up onto the surface at all. A submerged drive forgives sloppy rigging. A surface drive files a formal complaint. Low-speed manners are the honest weak point. When the propeller is half in the air by design, reverse thrust is feeble, and idling through a crowded marina with 1,000 horsepower behind you takes a light hand and a trimmed-down drive. These units are heavy, they demand a hull that can actually use them, and they make no sense whatsoever under a boat that tops out at 45. The 6 was built to solve one problem, and it solves nothing else. None of that stopped Mercury from building a larger version because somebody looked at 1,350 horsepower and wanted more. The M6 you can buy today is the direct descendant, and the family resemblance is total. Twin-pinion gear shafts splitting the torque, forged lower gears, dry-sump lubrication, and that narrow surface-piercing case. Ratios span roughly 1.3:1 through 1.7:1, depending on what the boat needs. It's the standard drive behind the supercharged 700 SCI, and it carries the 600 SCI and the quad-cam 1100 as well. The smaller engines in the range, the 520 and the 565, make do with Bravo XR drives, which tells you where the dividing line sits. Then there's the M8, which arrived about 15 years ago at a Miami show alongside the turbocharged 1350. Mercury built it by combining the best of the dry-sump NXT and the 6, and it delivers roughly 35% more capacity than the 6 it grew out of. The published figures are 1,600 horsepower and 1,600 pound-feet of input torque, which would have read like a typo in the Don Johnson era. The clever detail is height. The M8's gearcase is 2 inches shorter, which lets the engine sit 2 inches deeper in the hull. Lower center of gravity, better handling, and more freedom for the builder to shape an engine hatch that doesn't resemble a shipping container. Inside, a prop shaft-driven pump sprays the upper gears, while the lower cavity stays bathed in oil, and an active anode comes standard for corrosion protection. One question remains for the outboard crowd. What does any of this have to do with your own transom? More than you'd guess. Every principle in the number 6 lives on the transom of high-performance outboards. When you bolt a Sportmaster gearcase to a bass boat, you're buying the same idea. A slim, surface-piercing torpedo with low water pickups and a crescent-leading edge aimed at boats running past 85. When you hang a cleaver-bladed propeller and jack the motor up until half the propeller rides above the surface, you're doing precisely what Gentry's Scarab did offshore. Mercury's newest outboard gearcases are advertised for submerged, transition, and fully surfaced running, which is the same conversation in a different bolt pattern. Power plants came and went, from carbureted big blocks through supercharged SCI engines to quad-cam turbos. The gearcase behind them kept the same fundamental architecture because the physics never moved. Jokes aside, that's rarer than it sounds. Most parts in this industry get superseded every decade or so. This one got renamed, refined, and re-rated, and it's out there tonight on a skater, a cigarette, an Outer Limits, and an MTI, doing 150 miles an hour with 2 small pinion gears splitting the load between them. One last thought before we're done about why the drive matters more than the horsepower number painted on the cowl. If you want more stories and interesting things you may not know, my breakdown of why cigarette boats always use engines by this company is the perfect one to watch next. So the next time somebody at the ramp leads with a horsepower figure, ask what's holding the propeller. The engine gets the badge, the drive takes the abuse. 2 pinion gears, a hotel room, and a Swiss racer who walked away. That's how boats changed forever.